guy says that you are in sync with what's happening in Silicon Valley right now. And my niece works in artificial intelligence, and she definitely sees you that way. She sees big as a Netflix, an Airbnb. Do you see it that way?
I mean, I think maybe the one thing that I think we definitely share um, with this kind of entrepreneurial spirit of Silicon Valley is I love the book called The Rational Optimist. Um, and its basic statement is that when you look empirically at how the world has evolved over the last many centuries and even millennia, optimism is not a question of naivety or hopefulness. It's actually the most rational attitude, because things are so that's it's almost like the experienced viewpoint. And I think this profound optimism gives us an ability to interact with the world and maybe pursue possibilities and opportunities that maybe a more sort of traditional architect might miss or might not identify. Actually, I think one interesting thing is the Danish word for design is formgivning, which means literally to give form to something that has not yet been given form. And I think as the world is always changing, there's always some kind of, obviously a lot of that transformation comes from technology, but it can also come from migration or cultural change or environmental change, climate change. And whenever there's change happening, the world that we live in today won't fit perfectly. There's like these openings in the fabric. And whenever you if you listen and learn and look, and you identify these moments of transformation, you have an opportunity to give form to the future. And I think more than anything, we are always looking for those moments of change and those opportunities to give form to the future we want to live in.
When you went to the founders of Google and got the commission to do the new Googleplex, what was that meeting like?
Yeah, well, I think it was actually like interesting. Actually, Michelle Kaufman, one of our good friends and collaborators, is here from Google also. But actually, I met Larry Page, and it was a little bit frustrating because, I mean, in a way, my self image is to be innovative and sometimes to meet very professional people that know exactly what they're doing, but then try to like gather audience and then maybe push the boundaries a little bit more, going a little bit further. Whereas I think with Larry Page, I had to be the sort of the more sort of boring person, reminding him that certain materials were not like totally available yet, and
such as
and there was. I think in Larry's minds, like everything that was technically possible was already ready and available. But in architecture, things need to go through a process where they get approved. They also have to reach a price point where you can actually make buildings out of them and not just iPhones. So I was saying, like, in the beginning, I had to get used to being the sort of the boring technician, sort of having to deliver on these visions.
For me, one thing speaks to you not being the boring technician, and it is crystallized for me. First meeting with Douglas Thurston. Okay, 11 years ago. Lead with a question. Tell us the circumstances. Tell me what he said.
So basically, Denmark had a very progressive mayor at the time. Megan had our first female mayor, and she wanted to introduce high-rises back into Copenhagen. Copenhagen has beautiful houses, but they're like several hundred years old. The rest is five stories high. So then she wanted to make sustainable high-rises, and she knew that the Douglas and the Thurston organization, I think Jody is here today, they have pioneered sustainable high-rises. So they did the first LEED Platinum residential tower, the first LEED Platinum commercial tower, which is theirs. And so she invited Douglas Thurston to come to Copenhagen to talk about sustainable high-rises. And he was so passionate about the performance of the building. But it felt a little bit as if their architects had designed the building with aesthetics in mind, and it was upgraded with an ice cooling plant and all this kind of cool environmental technology. So I felt it's the only time I ever asked a question after a talk. But I just complimented the ambition, but then I asked if they had ever that the design of the building, the architecture of the building, could actually play an active role in the environmental agenda of the building. And Douglas, he sums it up much shorter. He says that I asked him, why do all your buildings look like buildings? But at least...
and he's one of your leading clients now, I should point out.
No, actually, sorry. I think the more of this is like, if you have a question to ask, please do it, because like crazy shit can happen.
So you said that you want to mix the practical with the fantastical. How'd that work for Larry Silverstein?
I mean, I think I think that the two World Trade Center, like building one of the World Trade Center towers, it was incredibly intimidating, and also they had already done because like ground zero is actually not ground zero. It's almost like the 8th floor of a giant building that continues down. There's like 11 different subway lines and like all kinds of single things. So we had to design a building where all of the columns had already been placed because you have to in order to get to level 0, the street level. So in a way, I think it was our most like restricted challenge ever, but also where there was like almost the highest demand for doing something extraordinary. And I think that the idea we came up with that's
before you get into that, didn't he say that he didn't want any alien buildings? And I think you've given me permission to ask you to say exactly what he did say. It was something about green bananas.
No, it's because like he was basically just pressing upon us that he was 84 years old. So he's basically saying,
I'm 84. So I'm telling you, Bjarke, we have to move fast. There's no time for green bananas.
And I
noticed that.
It's very clear communication, because I definitely learned that it's like if you don't know how long time you have, you don't buy the green bananas, you buy the yellow bananas because you can eat them today. So I don't know how we're delivering on that, because like we're still not going vertical. But one of the good things about the two World Trade Center is that normally when you build a building, you start by going down, excavating, putting in the foundations, everything. That's already been done. So as soon as we start building, we'll be going vertical from day one.
It's a line in the film about a stairway to heaven comes from a very interesting source. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like tells you something about how it is to make public art, and in my mind, architecture is by definition a public art, because the buildings are standing outdoor in public space, and they become part of people's cities. So when we presented the design for two World Trade Centers to the world, I got a letter from the brother of one of the folks that gave his life at 9/11, and he wrote me an email telling me that he saw in the project with the sort of 7 cascading terraces a giant stairway to heaven. And he saw it at the commemoration of the heroic stair climb of the first responders at 9/11, but also as a stairway for the innocent souls that died at 9/11 to ascend. And I had to tell him that that was nothing we had thought of, but now that he said it, I would never be able to look at the building again without seeing that stairway to heaven, and that's why I'm using it in the sentence. And I think it just shows you that the second, as an architect, you hand over the building to the client, it's no longer yours. It actually becomes the ownership of everybody, and any inhabitant of the city has just as valid an interpretation of your work, no matter what you intended. This is now how it is.
Introduced again tonight as a starchitect. How do you feel about that? That term. What's not so good?
I mean, I think maybe the not so good part is that it sounds pretentious and also maybe superficial. I think the good part of the fact that I think architecture has become more of an interest for everybody than it was 20 years ago. And I think the fact that that certain architects like Frank Gehry and Rem Koolhaas, my old boss, Zaha Hadid, who passed away last year, have star power means that people, just like you might end up going to watch a movie because you're in love with or like admiring Leonardo DiCaprio or Vikander, to name a few, from a distance, and then you end up watching a great movie. I think if you have an interest in these personalities, then you end up actually maybe diving in and learning a lot about architecture, and eventually you end up with a public that has a greater repertoire and a greater vocabulary surrounding the field of architecture. Because I think one of the strange things is that architecture is the one art form that you cannot avoid, because you are sort of your entire life and the possibilities of your life are conditioned by your physical environment. You're born in a building, you live in a building, you work in a building, you probably die in a building. So of course people should have a really profound understanding of architecture, and I think that it only helps making it more popular.
Let's leave aside, and we'll get back to the movies in a moment. But let's leave aside the kind of celebrity aspect of it. There's a real quality here of charisma. And the best description I ever heard was, if I'm looking this way and a star with a lot of charisma walks in behind me, I'm going to turn around. And that actually happened at Big this morning. We were doing the interview just before. There's a charisma there. There's a power there. First of all, do you accept that? Second of all, how can you use it to further your aims?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, again, I think I think it's I think I'm the wrong person to ask about it, but what I do think is that there's this thing about, great stories are driven by conflict, because if you have a protagonist with a clear goal and seemingly insurmountable obstacles in order to achieve that goal, then you have a good foundation for a story, and a good foundation for empathy, because you'll empathize with the person going through all these obstacles to reach what he or she wants. And I think in architecture there are so many insurmountable obstacles, and if you can actually somehow retain a level of optimism and maybe opportunism in this sort of
impact,
then you can actually, almost like in a sort of martial arts kind of way, you can turn the force of your opposition into your own strength. And I think maybe I have and we have some of that ability. That I mean, I've actually noticed quite often when when I'm going to a meeting with someone that I haven't been to, like a big difficult meeting with before from our team, and we come out and they'll often be devastated by this shitty meeting where everything went wrong, and I will typically have a much different. I was like, okay, this is much better than I had expected, and I think this is really something we can work with. I think there's great possibilities here. So I think that's sort of almost like Energizer Bunny-esque, relentless sort of forward motion is something that can be incredibly useful, I think, in many aspects of life, but especially in architecture.
We saw you go through a lot of pain here this evening. Was that tough to watch, to relive that?
I mean, I have to say that as I said at the beginning, that this is a film that Kasper has created from a raw material that is based on my life and the sort of the last 7 years of Big's struggles, and also, as I said, he could have made many different films. I'm happy he made a film where the architect gets the girl in the end. That, but I think that I don't know if I mean I did have a lot of headache, and I did have headache for like 3 years. I don't know if I thought I was going to die. I have to say, probably not. But
Because you're an optimist,
as I
right?
said, I think it was harder turning 40 without without a family than it was being hit in the head with a baseball bat. But but I'm actually incredibly, because I mean there is this thing about architecture. Because I mean on the, like a week before my 40th birthday, we were already with this project for the Smithsonian, and we were going through the schedule, and I could sort of see like now I'm turning 40, I'm already feeling bad about it, but we're submitting the final project in 2036 when I'll be 62. So I could see the rest of my life just done with that one project. So I instead of feeling bad turning 40, I was like feeling bad about the fact that I was going to be 62 very soon. At least it's all here in the schedule. So so I think that like somehow, like, because the buildings are such a big long part of your life that I'm working on a project right now that I'll be submitting when I'm 62. So that really makes you feel much more mortal than if you were having like 1 week deadlines and then the next project.
We have to say hello to our friends out in LA at CAA, and I am a film critic, so I want to ask you about how your taste in movies reflects your architecture. And we know from your mom that you were fascinated by movies at a very early age.
I mean, I think movies. Like, first of all, I have to say, for me, this is a historical moment, because I mean, I've been spending a lot of time with Sandy Canyon and Eyewitness News Movie Minutes. So I think it's sort of it's probably like one of the most exciting moments in my life is going to be on Friday, when Sandy is going to review Big Time and the Yellow Cabs. And I just hope that he doesn't end up saying, "I'm Sandy Canyon, and I just wasted 2 hours of my life, so you don't have to." But I think the amazing thing about cinema is that cinema, because I mean, as architects, you have to exchange ideas about space and about atmosphere and about material and about situations, and especially if you're trying to do something that you can't really just point at, you know, if you're not trying to do the same as some other building that you can point at, then often cinema becomes an amazing common cultural reference, where you can actually, just by referring to a scene, you can create an atmosphere. You can sort of
You do that in meetings?
we do that all the time in the meetings, and quite often if you're working on a project, then there'll be like obvious sort of cinema references. We're working on a zoo for the Philadelphia Zoo right now, and at the ending, all M. Night Shyamalan's films take place in Philadelphia, and his last film, Split, about a sort of a schizophrenic with 19 different personalities. It actually takes place in the very zoo where we're designing. So I encourage the team to watch that film, because it's like a very cool scene. Because like it's a zoo where you have like these cages where the big cats actually walk around over the audience, which is pretty freaky. But there's like a predator walking over you when you're walking there. But it's just amazing that source of common cultural reference that you can draw upon as an architect.
A movie called Inception was very influential for you. How come?
I mean, I think the only sort of edge that Inception has on Big Time, I think, is that Leonardo plays the architect in Inception. But I think the great thing about Inception is that it does sort of it's a film about architects that are no longer practicing as architects. They have started working with dreams, because like they found that in the dream world, things that would be impossible in the real world, they can actually realize all those wild fantasies in the dream world, and then they end up becoming criminals, stealing people's ideas or planting ideas into people's minds through their dreams. But I think it's a good it's a good statement about what architecture should really be all about. Because in the film, Leonardo DiCaprio talks about how him and his wife, Marion Cotillard, both architects, they wanted to live in a house with a garden, but they wanted to be in a skyscraper as well. And they say, like, in real world, you would have to choose between one or the other, but in the dream world, they could actually have both. But I think that's exactly what architecture should be all about.
And this building, in fact, is sort of the mixture. Of that.
You have some of it here, exactly. And I think that is what architecture should be about: making the actual real world more like your dream.
You mentioned the zoo. The pandas in the Copenhagen Zoo. You say, I like it when the clients are most demanding. True, and why?
No, but I think it is, and I have to say, like, pandas are quite demanding. So, I mean, first of all, you can't understand what they're saying because they're from China, and so you have to speak with everybody who knows about them or things they know about them. Then another thing we learned is that they're incredibly solitary. So there's going to be a male and a female, and they have to live in the same sort of environment, but they can't cohabit because they'll get into a fight. In that sense, they're very much like humans. So we had to make this sort of a habitat that's tailored to the fact that they can cohabit. We'll keep them separate, so it actually became like a yin yang. But I think, in a way, it is the almost again in like the sort of Aikido martial arts, turning the force of your opposition into your own strength. But the more difficult demands you have from the client, from the conditions, you make the standard solution impossible because it's not solving all these demands. So by actually piling on demands, you make the standard solution inadequate, and you force the architecture into backbending shapes and sort of unusual moves. I like to compare it to the game Twister, the family game, where that in the beginning you have to stand, you just stand on this field, and you stand in a boring pose, like a standard pose. But then as the game unfolds, you have to then put your hand there, and you have to put another foot there, and suddenly you find yourself in like backbending positions with your sort of face rubbing up against body parts of family members, and it becomes fun. And in a similar way in architecture, by piling on more demands, by saying, for instance, like here in Via, that we also wanted to make a big courtyard in the heart of the block. But the courtyard also has a skyscraper, so it has to be like 40 floors high. That would mean that sunlight would never come down into the courtyard, and then you end up with the extreme asymmetry and the pyramid. And suddenly you have a design that I'm quite sure that if we would have come to the first meeting with Douglas and Jody and company with that design, that would have probably been the end of that collaboration. But because we arrived there together in a sort of 3-month design process, back and forth, and at some point we were working with 2 peaks and a much more distributed building. And then one day, like, Douglas calls me up and says, we like everything we've done so far, but can we just shift all of the density towards the east? Just keep everything else the same. And that was like sort of, that's obviously impossible to do. But then somehow we ended up with this idea of just like lifting up the northeast corner until we had the density we needed. And it looked way more crazy than anything we've been working on for the last 3 months. And we showed it to Douglas and Jody, and they basically was like, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, fuck yeah.
It's been a privilege sitting in this building you designed, hearing your eloquence about the building, and so many other topics. Thanks for being here. Bjarke Ingels.
Thank you.
Reception to follow, right?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe just one actual note. I think there's some kind of guidance, but basically we should go over to the east side of the building where the entrance is now, and there we can go to a little after party. I hope all of you will join us. Thank you very much for coming.